All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Facts Over Feelings podcast. I'm back here with my co-host Trevor Kaufman for episode number 39, and it's been I think 2 weeks now, or at least 10 days or so. But Texas had a little bit of a crazy storm. My power was kind of on and off and in shambles for a few days, but we're back. We're back, better than ever. And luckily we've had a decent amount of stuff happen in both the NFL and the NBA, particularly the NFL, with the offseason starting kind of in full swing. Trevor, really not much of a lull in between the Super Bowl and free agency here. We had a blockbuster trade. Carson Wentz, Trevor, was finally traded from the Eagles, something that we saw coming, something that we thought might happen. But he ended up being traded to the Indianapolis Colts, and he was traded for a 2021 third and a 2022 second that will turn into a 2022 first if he plays 75% of the snaps next season, which looks pretty likely barring catastrophic injury. So basically it was for a 2022 first and a 2021 third. And Trevor, I wanted to ask you, who won this trade? Was there a clear winner or loser?
I like the trade for both teams. Going to quickly go through it for both sides.
Yeah.
Philadelphia, it just seemed like it wasn't working with Carson Wentz anymore for whatever reason. And so for them, I think the pros of this trade are they get a 2021 third round pick, and they're likely going to get a first round pick in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And they also get a lot of cap space off the books. They did have to pay a lot in dead cap to execute this trade with Carson Wentz, but now that large contract will be off the books for future years. However, Indianapolis did win this trade, and here's why. It's because of their head coach, Frank Reich. Frank Reich was the offensive coordinator, I believe, in 2017 when Carson Wentz had a very high caliber, almost MVP-like year. And now they are going to be rejoining in Indianapolis. And I think if I'm Colts fans, I'm feeling great. I know Carson Wentz has had a couple down years. I get it, but I still believe in him. And I believe him working with Frank Reich will bring out the best in him. I mean, we've seen it with other examples, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay. Frank Reich is another one of those guys that can mask a quarterback's weaknesses and bring out the best in their play. And that is why I love this trade for the Indianapolis Colts. They have an excellent offensive line, which is something Wentz has never had. They have one nice kind of young receiver in Michael Pittman, but I do think they're going to need to bolster that receiving core a little bit. Allen Robinson's a name that comes to mind. They have a nicer young running back in Jonathan Taylor, and they have an improving defense. So for me, I think this is a perfect situation for Carson Wentz, and I think the Indianapolis Colts get better with this trade, and I really like them to win the AFC South next year.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think that this trade does benefit both teams in different ways. Starting with the Eagles, Trevor, I feel like this trade, it's a kind of trade that helps the team itself, like the actual roster of the team, but it just hurts from like a management perspective because you're burning so much money trading Carson Wentz away. And we didn't say this initially, but they're also they're having to pay $30 million in dead money for the Carson Wentz contract, which is a lot of money, especially with a hard cap in the NFL league where it's just you cannot go over the cap at any cost. So that's a tough situation financially for the Eagles. It's just kind of a tough pill to swallow, seeing how much money they had to throw away to Carson Wentz. But I think it helps them as a team immediately because I think Jalen Hurts is the guy I just think he's the guy for this team. There was just some sort of spark on the offense that you didn't see when Wentz was there. Hurts is much more mobile. He can run the read option, something that Wentz couldn't really do. And that helps mask the offensive line issues, something that's been a problem for years for Philadelphia. And obviously it's become worse over these last few seasons. So I think Hurts is just the guy for the future. And I think that this was a good trade for them. And they got pretty likely a first and a third, which is solid when you're giving away a guy with this big of a contract, right? A guy with this much money. And, for the Colts, they definitely won this trade on their side as well. I mean, this team, this could not have been a more perfect fit for Carson Wentz, Trevor. I mean, Carson Wentz needed offensive line help. We knew it on Philadelphia. We knew it. We said, he's just struggling and he's not the same player he was. And he wasn't. He's not the same player that he was a couple of years ago. And a lot of that was because he had to run for his life and he didn't know what to do. He turned into a different quarterback because he didn't trust his line. And now that he has a strong line in Indy, perhaps the best line in football, at least one of the best, I mean, I think he can get back to his old self if he trusts the line. If he trusts the line, and if they get him maybe one more weapon, like you mentioned, Allen Robinson, if they can get him one more weapon in Indy, I think that would put him over the top. And I really think that Indy could be a threat. Maybe not to beat the Chiefs, right? Maybe not to be better than the Ravens, but they could be there, win a couple games in the playoffs, win the AFC South. I 100% agree with you. So while he is expensive, Wentz, and it is sort of a gamble because he's fallen off a little bit in the last few years,
Mm-hmm.
if he can get his confidence back with this line, I mean, the sky's the limit for this Colts team.
Yeah, I want to build off your point a little bit, and I'm telling people right now, I love Frank Reich in Indianapolis. I think he's done a terrific job. I said it at the beginning of this year. I said, all right, when we were going through our who's gonna, win the divisions and all that, Tennessee ultimately ended up winning the AFC South, but both teams went 11-5, and I said the Colts were the least penalized team in the NFL, and that is due to coaching. And I think he is an elite head coach. I think he did a very good job with Phillip Rivers and a little bit of an offense that isn't as dynamic as other offenses in the NFL. T.Y. Hilton's an aging receiver. They don't really have a great number two. Pittman's a nice young player. And also had to work with a rookie running back. So I think another year of Jonathan Taylor maturing in the NFL. I think if they can draft a receiver or pick someone up in free agency, I think this is going to be a team that could – I think its ceiling is the AFC Championship game because I really have a lot of confidence in Reich's ability to get Wentz back on track. And they're not quite good enough to beat Kansas City. They might not even be good enough to beat Buffalo or Baltimore, as you mentioned, but I do think this team can win a game or two in the playoffs. And I do think they are easily the favorites to win the AFC South this year.
Yeah, and before we move on, I just want to point out that at least me, and I'm sure you've said this in the past as well. But for me myself, I've said for a while the Colts have a really good team. They have a really solid defense. It was a really good defense this year. I mean, I know at least in the first half of the year it was a top 3 or 4 defense, and I'm pretty sure it was solid throughout the season. And this offense, as we said, the O-line's great. Taylor's a solid running back. The coaching staff is elite. And when you have all the pieces, and what we said is they're missing quarterback. Phillip Rivers just didn't cut it this year, and we saw it throughout the season. He just wasn't enough. And in his age, he just couldn't do what he did in the past, in his younger days. And getting a guy like Wentz, now we can see what this team is really capable of. We'll see if they're capable of elite play. We'll see if they're capable of winning playoff games. Because I think they are, and I know you, I guess, definitely think they are with Carson Wentz behind center. So it'll be interesting to watch. But I do like the Eagles a year or two down the line. If they can draft well, get some O-line help, and get some help in that secondary, which is definitely weak in Philly. But a win-win for both sides, I would say.
I would agree with that, Ryan. And then moving on to our second NFL topic we wanted to discuss. And this one's a little bit interesting because it hasn't actually happened yet, but it's some big news across the NFL. J.J. Watt is going to be leaving Houston. And Ryan, where is the best potential destination for J.J. Watt for this upcoming season?
Yeah, Trevor, I mean, J.J. Watt is an interesting player because, he's obviously great and he's been great in his career. But he's had injury problems the last few years, and obviously he's going to go chase a ring, right? I mean, we obviously know that. He's not going to go to some sort of rebuilding team for a lot of money. He's going to go try to find a team for a couple of years, a year or two, maybe 3, where he can win a ring. And I think there are really 2 places that jump out to me right away, and that is Cleveland and Seattle. And both of them might seem kind of obvious. Cleveland, maybe some people might be like, why would you do that? Because they have Myles Garrett, right? But if you could have Myles Garrett and J.J. Watt on the same defensive line, that right there that might be the best combo. That might be the best duo in terms of 2 defensive ends in all of football. I know Watt's getting up there in age, but Garrett will attract double teams a lot of the time, leaving a lot of openings for Watt. And I think that having those guys on both sides of the line would make them absolutely nearly unstoppable if they're both healthy. So I think that would be a really good fit. And I think that Cleveland needs any help they can get on defense, any veteran leadership on defense, because they lacked that last year and they've lacked that for a few years now. So getting that would be really helpful for Cleveland. And Seattle, obviously, I think that speaks for itself. I mean, for years we've talked about now, ever since the Legion of Boom went away, this defense really hasn't been what it was, especially this D-line really just doesn't create any pressure. They got Carlos Dunlap last year, who helped at times, but Watt's better than Dunlap. And they could use another pass rusher. So if they could get him for a solid price, on that line, I think that would help a lot. So those are the two places that jumped out to me the most. Those are the two places that I would keep an eye on. But I don't know if Trevor, you have any other places that kind of jump to the front of your mind.
I do. I actually have two other places. One of them was fueled by a social media post from my receiver, DeAndre Hopkins, posting an edited picture of him and JJ Watt in Cardinals jerseys. As a Cardinals fan, I'd love to see that happen. You mentioned defensive line duos, Myles Garrett and JJ Watt. Chandler Jones and JJ Watt wouldn't be a bad duo either. Two elite pass rushers. You put that in there with, a young up-and-coming safety in Budda Baker. Patrick Peterson's still a pretty good corner in this league. Isaiah Simmons, who didn't have a great rookie year, but I think that would round out my Cardinals defense quite nicely. Don't know how that would work with the salary cap, but I would, do whatever I can to make it work. But if he's really trying to ring chase, I think the only destination that truly is a ring chasing destination based on track record and, what we've seen is Tampa Bay. I think if you're trying to win a ring, you go to Tampa Bay. That's what we saw this year. Antonio Brown mid-season. Gronkowski comes back. They bring in guys like Ndamukong Suh, Jason Pierre-Paul, a bunch of veteran players who have a track record of being good in this league but don't have a championship. And what better way to chase a ring than to play with the guy who has the most rings of all time in Tom Brady? So I think for me, Tampa Bay obviously is going to have some salary cap issues. I know they're going to have to figure out the Godwin situation, the Antonio Brown situation. For me, I would get rid of Antonio Brown. I think Chris Godwin is too good of an asset long-term to let go unless you really don't think he's worth it. But I would get rid of Antonio Brown. You don't need him. And I would figure out a way to fit in J.J. Watt. I think this would make Tampa Bay the favorites to win the Super Bowl again next year, even more over Kansas City. And I already think Tampa Bay's defense is excellent. It's only going to get better. I mean, they have a lot of young players in that secondary. Winfield was a rookie. Murphy
Carlton
Bunting
Davis
was in his first or second year. Carlton Davis was in his maybe second year, third year. So this defense is only going to get better. Devin White's not going anywhere. So for me, if J.J. Watt wants to chase a ring, I think Tampa Bay is the perfect destination for him.
Yeah, I mean, that Tampa Bay situation is really interesting. I mean, if he wants a ring chase, you're definitely right. He could go to Tampa Bay. I mean, with that D-line, Pierre-Paul and Sue, I mean, adding Watt to that, that's scary right there. Even if they weren't to keep, I think Sue's a free agent, so even if they weren't to keep him, to have Pierre-Paul and Watt on that same line, talking about defensive end duos, I mean, you want another one right there. I mean, that's an elite one right there as well. So, I mean, he definitely has a lot of options, and it'll be interesting to see where he goes because if he's healthy, I mean, he's a turning point for a defense, he's a good, solid run stopper, and obviously he can get to the quarterback. So it'll be really interesting to see where J.J. Watt ends up. And I don't know. We'll see in the next coming weeks. I know he said he's going to take time to make his decision. So we'll see where he ends up. But Trevor, I mean, I don't know if you have any final thoughts on this, but I think if you don't, I think we can move on to kind of the main topic for discussion because the regular season is in full swing, and that is the NBA. We just wanted to talk about some teams that we thought had made some interesting, moves or won or lost a lot of games in the last few weeks. And Trevor, I wanted to start with you with a team that arguably is the hottest in basketball, one of the hottest in basketball, certainly, in the Phoenix Suns. So go ahead and tell us what's been going on with this team, Trevor. Are they for real?
I said it on the last podcast. I am a full believer in this Phoenix Suns team. We had that little bit of a screw-up game, you could say, against Brooklyn last Tuesday. We blew a 24-point lead. No Kyrie, no KD.
Wow.
They came back to win that game. That was a bit of that hurt. That game hurt a little bit. And I'm a huge Phoenix Suns fan. I was looking at a lot of fan pages, and there were some angry people on those fan pages, and they were getting a little frustrated. And my thing is let's see how we do after a game like that. So we come out against New Orleans, and we have our most dominant fourth quarter of the season. Outscored them 41-12 in the fourth quarter to go from down 11 to win by 18. The next two games after that, we absolutely demolish a shorthanded Grizzlies team, and then we absolutely demolish a Portland Trailblazers team tonight at home. So for me, the Phoenix Suns are for real. They've won 12 of their last 14 games. You're seeing Booker and Chris Paul learn how to play with each other. You're seeing the maturation of guys like Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges. I think getting Dario Saric back, he was hurt and had COVID, so he's missed a lot of games this season, has been huge for us. And this is a complete team. There are no weaknesses on this team. I don't really think we need a backup center anymore. I think that was a worry of some people's early on in the season. But I think the two center lineup with Kaminsky and Ayton is working, and then bringing in Dario and Jay Crowder off the bench to play a little bit more of a small ball type game has been working fantastic. And yeah, I'm a full believer in the Suns team. I'm still a little bit concerned at times. Losing leads has been a bit of an issue, but it hasn't been as much of an issue recently. And I just think it's a really well constructed roster.
Mm.
And I know people don't want to believe it, but Chris Paul is that guy. And Chris Paul has brought out the best in a lot of these guys. And I still think there's a lot more room to improve. I still think the sky's the limit. But for right now, 20-10, fourth in the West. Let's see what happens. I know there aren't a lot of teams healthy right now. There's a lot of teams at least missing somebody. But look, the Suns are healthy. We're playing good basketball. And yes, Ryan, we are the hottest team in the NBA.
Yeah, so, I wanted to take my turn and talk about these Phoenix Suns because they are a team worth talking about. And I mean, they are very hot right now. And, there's really no other way to explain it other than they're playing good basketball. I mean, you look at this team, Trevor, they're top 10 in offensive rating, they're eighth, and defensive rating, they're seventh. So they're top 10 in both sides of the ball, which is, a mark of a really solid team. And I think something else to note is they commit the fourth least fewest turnovers on the offensive end per game, which is another mark of a great team. And they had the sixth most assists per game out of all teams on the offensive end of the floor. And I think that's a really, those are some really interesting numbers. Those numbers stand out to me as numbers that show a team that takes care of the basketball, shares the basketball, and plays both ends of the floor very well. So to me, I mean, I got to give credit to Monty Williams. I mean, I think he's done a really good job, and you see it in these numbers, Trevor. I've had my doubts about this team. I've said, this team needs time. This team, can't just jump right into the playoffs and kind of start winning right away. And we're not in the playoffs yet, but I mean, we're in the regular season, and they're rolling. And like you said, they've blown a few leads, but as I pointed out a few podcasts ago, the Suns aren't blowing as many leads as they used to. Instead of doing that as much as they used to, now they're holding on to these leads and strengthening these leads late, which is a mark of an improving team, I will admit. Now, do I think this team will be a top 5 team in the West this year? No. Do I think they'll cool off a little bit? Yes. Do I think they'll make the playoffs? Yes. I think they'll make the playoffs. I still don't think they'll be a top-end Western Conference team just because I truly think that they'll come back down to earth a little bit. I believe, if I see this correctly, I believe their strength of schedule is 16th in the league. So right around middle of the pack. I think it'll get a little harder going into the second half of the year.
It definitely will.
Being in the West, it'll just get harder. It's just the way it is. But, I mean, this team is doing all the right things. I mean, they're doing well in all the right categories, right? And I think if they continue that, I mean, who knows? They could exceed my expectations and hold the top 5 seed in the West. But, as of now, they're extremely hot, playing good basketball, and, I think they'll finish in the middle to the back end of the playoff seeding. But good for them. Good for the Suns. Playing good basketball right now.
Yeah, I'll counter your one point about them coming back to earth. And why I don't agree with that in this case is because this is an example of a team that has a lot of new bodies and a lot of new moving parts. And I think the biggest struggles with this team were what we saw at the beginning of the season, losing leads, not CP3 and Booker not quite clicking. Their numbers are both down a little bit. And now you're seeing CP3 and Booker learn to play with each other. You're seeing a healthy full rotation. And for me, I think, I don't know how many games we've played with our full roster, with our full 10-man or 9 or 10-man rotation, but I don't think it's very many. So for me, I think getting more and more game reps, you're only going to see the Suns become harder and harder to beat. Yep. Will we be blowing out teams like Portland and Denver and other Western Conference playoff teams by 30? No, that is not going to happen. Tonight was a bit of an outlier, hit a bunch of threes, got hot. The Blazers outside of Damian Lillard were ice cold. So yeah, games like that are going to happen. But for me, I think this is what's so encouraging is the Suns are finding their stride, and maybe they'll cool off a little. I don't know if I want to say they're going to cool off as much as maybe the competition will pick up a little bit, but I don't see the Suns playing worse as the season goes on. I see them playing better. And if the competition happens to be better, then maybe we'll fall back a little bit. But I don't like this idea of cooling off just because in this case, it's about repetition and reps. And I don't think as a full team we've had those reps yet. And once we do, we're going to be really, really hard to beat.
Sure. I mean, I do agree. That's a fair argument, right? I mean, every team needs reps, especially with their starters and their full rotation
Right.
to really. I mean, we saw that with the Clippers, I think, last year, Trevor, right? I mean, the Clippers didn't really play a lot with the full team. There was always
Right.
someone on load
Right.
management, right? Or someone out. And we kept saying, wait, see if they gel. And obviously they didn't really. But you're right. I mean, it's a fair point to see if they can play better as a unit. But I do, I did mention some really good stats for this team, but some before we move on, there's just like a couple stats that kind of stand out to me as well that worry me. And you can't be good in every category, but it's
No,
just
you
something to
can't.
keep. It's just something to keep an eye on. I mean, they're 30th in free throw attempts per game. The Phoenix Suns. It's just
Yes, I
something.
have noticed that.
Yeah, it's just something a little bit concerning. They're just not getting to the line a lot. I want to see a little more of that, especially Aiton. I want to see him get to the line more. Booker, obviously, I don't know how much he gets to the line, but as a star player, I mean, he gets to the line about 5 times, 5 free throw attempts a game for Booker. I want to see that go up. I want to see that at
I
6,
do
7,
too.
or 8 attempts a game. And offensive rebounding. They're 26 in offensive rebounding. When you say you don't think they need a center, backup center, you're probably right. But if you did want one, that's why you'd want one. Just a guy who could grab you some offensive boards in the second or third quarters, give you some energy. So, I mean, just a couple places to improve, a couple places to keep an eye on as the season goes on. But yeah, I don't know. This team,
Oh
they're a good
yeah.
team, improving team.
I totally agree about your point about the free throw shooting. We need to attempt more free throws per game. We are a very jump shooting heavy team, which is why we've
Mm.
seen spurts where we've missed 20 straight 3-pointers. And then we've also seen spurts where 2 games ago we hit a franchise record 25 threes and won by 30. So for me, living and dying by the jump shot can be dangerous, and free throws are a great way to make up points from missed shots and other stuff like that. So I do agree with your point there. But I could talk about my Suns all night, Ryan. I do want to toss it over to you because you have a couple of interesting teams you want to talk about. So
I
whoever
do,
you want to start
yeah.
with.
I mean, I wanted to talk about a team that I wasn't expecting to talk about, Trevor, and that's the Chicago Bulls. Going into this season, they got head coach Billy Donovan for this team, and we both knew he was a good coach, right? We both knew he did
Mm-hmm.
wonders in OKC, but we didn't really know how much of it was him and how much of it was Chris Paul and the leadership he provided. And I think the answer is it was both of them because Billy Donovan, I think,
Yeah.
is a legit head coach because this Chicago team was lost last year. It was lost. It had no direction. You didn't know if Zach LaVine would want out, if he would leave, if he'd be unhappy. Lauri Markkanen was not improving. He actually got a little bit worse from his rookie season last year. Wendell Carter
Mm-hmm.
Jr. was injured. There was just a lot of messy stuff going on. And this year, Trevor, they've stepped it up. I mean, they're 6-4 in their last 10 games. They're currently the 8th seed in the East. And I think this team is semi-legit. I think this team actually will sneak into the playoffs this year. And I'm interested to see where they can go in the future if they can get a few more pieces. I really
Mm-hmm.
like their starting lineup. I really like Wendell Carter. I think he's a fantastic defender, rim protector. He gets multiple blocks a game. Zach LaVine, obviously fantastic, averaging 29 points a game this year. Uh,
Yeah, he's been fantastic.
and Kobe White is playing better, a guy who they need to play better. They need Kobe White to step it up because he struggled for a lot of last year, beginning of this year as well. But he's stepping it up now, averaging 15 a game, shooting 35% from three. So he's stepping it up slowly but surely. And I want to see continued improvement. And, if I keep seeing that, Trevor, I mean, I think this team in the future could be a middle of the road playoff team, a team similar to the Indiana Pacers, a team middle of the pack with some talent. And who knows, they get a few more pieces, more could come of it. But I really like what I'm seeing from this team. I think that, this year they've improved in a lot of categories, none more so than offense. I mean, their offense has improved mightily from last year. It's now top half of the league in offensive rating, barely, but it's top half, which is a major improvement from last year and something that I really like. And one last thing before I turn it over to you. Their pace of play is fourth highest in the league, which I really like for young teams. I really like when young teams play with pace because it gets them in transition a lot, right? It gets them moving a lot. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times when they play half court sets with young teams, they make silly mistakes, right? They don't really run the plays exactly correctly. If you're in transition, you're moving constantly, it's easier just to go just bang bang plays, right? Less time to think, overthink things, more time to just make athletic plays. And that's what they're doing right now. And I really like where they're going with this team, and I want to see where Billy Donovan moves this team forward in the future.
I agree with a lot of what you just said there. I'm really liking what I'm seeing from the Chicago Bulls team, and I agree. I do think they can make the playoffs as a 7 or 8 seed, or at the very least, I think they can make that play-in game and
Mm.
be. I think they will be in the top 10 in the East. I'm looking at the standings right now. Miami is out of the playoffs at the moment. And then outside of Miami, I think they're playing better than Charlotte. It's close. They're playing a little bit better than Atlanta.
Mm.
And then obviously the bottom, Orlando, Washington, Cleveland, and Detroit, they're all better than. So I definitely think Chicago will be right there come playoff time. And I think the biggest reason is Billy Donovan. Billy Donovan
Yeah.
has figured out a way to bring out. We saw Zach LaVine kind of break out a little bit last year.
Mm.
And I think he was one of the biggest all-star snubs. And he was averaging, I think, 25 or 27 a game or something like that. This year, he's averaging 29 a game, and he will not be an all-star snub. I'm sure he will make the all-star game. And Lauri Markkanen has been excellent this year, averaging 19 points a game. He's had a nice bounce back season. And I think that the maturation of some of these young guys, Kobe White, Wendell Carter, I already mentioned Lauri Markkanen, those guys have turned into a really nice young core for this team. And to complement that with Zach LaVine. And I agree with you, Ryan. I think this team actually has a bright future. They looked lost last year. They looked really pathetic. And then going into the draft, they draft a guy named Patrick Williams, who a lot of
Mm.
people were like, what? Like, who is that?
Yeah.
He's actually averaging 10 points a game. So he's definitely giving them at least something as a rookie, which is, I would say, exciting if I'm a Bulls fan.
Yep.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think they are one of those teams that needed to take a little while to learn how to play together, some new young pieces, a new head coach, but they're 5-2 in their last 7 games, and they have some winnable ones coming up. They play Minnesota, then they play my Suns, and then after that, I believe they have Denver and New Orleans, and then there's the All-Star break. So they have a couple winnable games coming up, and then we'll see how the second half of the season plays out. I do
Yeah.
think Miami will overtake them. But then again, I think if you're looking at the East right now, and I have the standings pulled up, you have New York at 7, Chicago 8, Charlotte 9, Miami 10, Atlanta 11. 2 of those 5 teams are going to get 7 and 8. 4 of those 5 teams are going to end up in at least the playing game.
Mm.
So I really think that's going to be the battle this year for the back end in the East. And yeah, I mean, there's no reason not to think that Chicago can make it, especially if Zach LaVine keeps playing at the level he's at.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And you point out Patrick Williams, and I wanted to further that point before we move on in a second. The key number to me that stands out is that he's shooting Trevor 39% from three on, I believe, about two and a half attempts a game, which is really, really good for a rookie, especially a rookie power forward, right? I believe he's a power forward, a guy, who I certainly didn't know much about coming into the NBA, but he's shooting the three at a really solid clip. And not only is he doing that, but the team is doing that. The team is, I believe they're ninth in the entire NBA in 3-point percentage. Yes, they are ninth in the NBA in 3-point percentage, which is, another great number that this team is having. So they're playing fast. Their rookie is hitting threes, and the team is hitting threes. So I really like these young players on this team. And if they can keep Zach LaVine long term, I mean, if they can get a couple more role players, fill out this bench a little bit, I think that they could be a really solid team in the future. So I'm excited to see what they do and what Billy Donovan can do to make this team even better than it is right now. But
And I want to mention one more thing. Sorry,
yeah, don't worry about it.
it makes me think even more. Why would Oklahoma City let him go? What happened with Oklahoma City? Because Billy Donovan seems to be that guy. I mean, he had plenty of success in college at Florida.
Yep.
He did an unbelievable job at Oklahoma City, and now he seems to be turning around Chicago in 1 year. And it makes you think, why would Oklahoma City let him go? What happened? But Billy Donovan deserves a lot of credit as well. He has done a fantastic job, I think, playing to his team's strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So we'll see what happens with them, but I am excited to see what they can do in the future. But with that, Trevor, yeah, I wanted to move on to your second team that you wanted to talk about, and it's a team, Trevor, in the Boston Celtics that choked a really big lead this past weekend. I believe this past Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
and it was against the New Orleans Pelicans. They blew it was a 24-point lead, Trevor.
It was, yes.
What happened with this team, and why do you want to talk about this team? What's the deal with the Celtics right now?
I want to talk about this team because they are struggling a lot more than I really thought they would. And
Mm,
coming into the season, I actually thought they had a really nice roster. I look at their, starting five. I look at Kemba Walker, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Tristan Thompson, and Daniel Tice. And then they bring in guys like Marcus Smart, Peyton Pritchard, and Jeff Teague, nice young role players like that off the bench. And for me, it's weird because Jason Brown and Jalen Tatum, or excuse me, Jason
mm.
Tatum and Jaylen Brown
Yeah.
are both averaging 25 and a half and 26 points per game. So they're both playing at an all-star level.
Hmm.
But what I think is missing from this team is defense and a little bit of veteran leadership and a little bit of that Draymond Green effect. And I think that's what they're missing right now with Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart's obviously been injured. He's only played 17 games this season. And I think he is a very critical piece to this team's success. He's the sixth man that comes off the bench that can give you offense and defense, in particular defense. And
Yeah.
you're seeing Boston really struggle as of late. I'm looking at their schedule right now, and they are currently, just I believe they've lost 6 of their last 9 games, right? They're just 3-6 in their last 9 games, and Marcus Smart has not played in very many of those. So I
Yep.
think they've lost defense, they've lost a little bit of toughness.
Mm.
And if Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum aren't elite, you would think Kemba Walker would be that third guy, but Kemba Walker has not been very good this year. And for
No.
whatever reason, I really don't know. I can't explain it. His shooting percentages are down. His points per game is way down. He's only averaging 17 points per game this season. And for whatever reason, there's just something a little bit off in Boston right now. I think they'll be okay. I think they're gonna, pick it up. Obviously, they have 6 games before the All-Star break, so I do think they're gonna, at least they'll coast in or try and coast into the All-Star break, and then I do think they'll figure it out in the second half of the season. But I think this team is just way too talented to be 500, especially in a weaker Eastern Conference, right? They play, they play more bad teams than teams in the West, and they're 500. So for me, that's a little concerning.
Mm.
And it's just weird because Brown and Tatum have been very good this season. But other than that, they haven't gotten much.
Yeah, to me, this is a puzzling team and a team I didn't really realize Trevor was 15-15 on the year. I'm surprised by that. The Celtics are a team that's pretty much they're the epitome of consistency, at least they have been in the past. And right now, they're the epitome of average. They're pretty
Mm-hmm.
average at everything right now, and I was surprised by that. I mean, they're middle of the pack in offense and defense right now. The only thing they're really excelling at is offensive rebounding. They're really not jumping out on
Mm-hmm.
any other aspect of the game right now. Maybe I mean, I guess they're limiting teams from the 3-point line. Opponents only shooting 35% from 3 against them, so that's good. But there's just not a lot of stuff that jumps out to me statistics wise for this team overall. When
Mm-hmm.
looking at Kemba Walker, I think that is the key to their struggles right now. And Kemba Walker's coming off, a significant knee injury from the bubble, I believe, right? I believe
Mm-hmm.
he had a knee injury from the bubble, and I think that either that's still affecting him or it prevented him from getting into his normal groove because. Man, Trevor, you're definitely right. He is struggling bad. I mean, Trevor, he's shooting 37% from the field. That's really bad. That is really, really, really
That
bad.
is
I mean, in comparison, Jaylen Brown's shooting 50% from the field, right? I mean,
right.
that's really good. But I mean, like Tatum's shooting 45%. I mean, he's not even close, right? And so that's a really big concern to me, especially because he's taking 15 shots a game, and you need him as a third scoring option. You need a third scoring option in this team, particularly because your bench isn't scoring that much for you. I mean, outside of their top 3 scorers and with Marcus Smart out, I mean, your highest scorer on the bench is Tristan Thompson, or Peyton Pritchard with 7 points a game. I mean,
Right.
that's a problem. That's a problem.
It
So
is.
they really need Kemba to step it up. And I mean, if he doesn't, I don't think this team even gets in the top 4 in the East. I mean, right now, I believe, Trevor, they're the 5 seed. They are the 6 seed. My bad. They're the 6 seed. And I mean, if Kemba can't step it up, I don't really see them getting past that 5 seed wall. I really don't.
Mhm.
Especially with
Wow, look who's in 5 real quick.
especially
That's
with
interesting.
Toronto coming back. And we talked about Toronto. We doubted them, but they're back in the 5 slot, and they're sliding right back into where they usually are. And I think they'll continue to improve and finish in the top 4. So Boston is in a little bit of trouble. And I'd be concerned if I was a Celtics fan. Kemba has to step it up. And Marcus Smart needs to get healthy. And they need bench depth. They need a wing who can score, a guard who can score, anybody who can get them quick points. Because Jeff Teague, he's really not cutting it, right? And
Right.
Tremont Waters, Carson Edwards, Peyton Pritchard, they're not cutting it points per game wise. So they need someone to step it up on the bench, and they need Kemba Walker to step it up in the starting lineup.
I agree with that analysis. And I do think Marcus Smart coming off the bench when he comes back will be a huge lift for
Mm,
them in that second unit.
yeah.
And I think this is interesting. And I think Boston is very Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum dependent right now.
Yeah.
I look at a team like the Bulls, they got 7 guys averaging at least 10 points a game. Boston only has 4. So
And one of them's
Boston,
hurt.
and yeah, one of them's hurt. So right now they only have 3 guys who are currently playing that average 10 points a game.
Yeah.
And for me, that's a problem. They don't have depth at scoring. And if Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown don't go off, they're going to lose basketball games. And that's kind of what happened with New Orleans yesterday. They got out to a big lead, but then Tatum and Brown cooled off a little bit. New Orleans came back and, they couldn't find, no one else could quite step up to stop the bleeding. And New Orleans ended up stealing a game that they shouldn't have won. So I do think there are some concerns in Boston. I do think Kemba Walker will play better in the second half of the season. I think getting Marcus Smart healthy will be big for this team. But I agree with you, Ryan. I think they'll end up being 4 or 5 because I don't trust Indiana all that much. I think they're better than Indiana. But Toronto is surging right now, and I don't really see them passing Brooklyn, Milwaukee, or Philadelphia in the top 3. So I do think if I'm a Boston fan, realistically, I will be a 4 or 5 seed in the East, which in my opinion is not good enough. You're a 2
Yeah.
seed last year.
Yeah.
You're 2 wins away from making the NBA finals. You should be better than a 5 seed in the Eastern Conference that isn't that good. I mean, no offense. I mean, the 8 seed right now is 2 games below 500. I mean, you go to the Western Conference, if you go to the Western Conference, if you're 2 games below 500, you're in 12th place. So they're in a weaker Eastern Conference, a not very deep Eastern Conference. So I think they really need to, figure it out the second half of the season.
I mean, we can kind of segue, Trevor, with this to the final team in the Brooklyn Nets that I wanted to talk about. But I
Mm-hmm.
just want to point out that the 8 seed in the East is 2 games below 500. The 8 seed in the West is 1 game above 500. So,
That's a
like,
3-game difference.
but the gap isn't super, super massive. Like,
The
I mean,
gap the gap is significant enough to where the 4 seed in the West would be the number 1 seed in the East. I think there's a pretty significant gap right now in
and
depth,
also
but that's a
then
discussion for another day.
yeah, the 9 seeds are identical. Yeah, it's a discussion for another day. We can debate that another time. But moving on to the Brooklyn Nets, Trevor, a team that I wanted to talk about because they made a statement. They came back against the
They
Phoenix
did.
Suns this past week from down 24 to win. They beat the Los Angeles Clippers, and mind you, Trevor, this is without Kevin Durant. This is without the second best player, in my opinion, in
Mm-hmm.
the NBA. Kevin Durant is an elite player, Hall of Fame player, guy who can win you championships, and they didn't even have him playing these games. And they beat the
I
Los
know.
Angeles Clippers, a team who did have Kawhi and Paul George both playing, who both combined for a total of 63 points. And they still lost
Mm-hmm.
to the Nets, who played 8 players, and one of them played for 6 minutes. So they essentially played 7 guys against the Clippers, and they beat them. And the Clippers played 10 guys, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is a really interesting win to me, and it kind of encompasses this entire Nets team. I don't really think anyone can beat them, Trevor. And I don't want to jump the gun here. A lot can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Injuries can happen. Teams can evolve. Teams can change.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. They're number 1 in offense right now. They're a terrible defensive team. That's totally irrelevant to me. They're
I
number
agree with
one.
you. I
They're
agree
number
with
one
you.
in effective field goal percentage. This team, I mean, they're number one in 2-point percentage. They're number two in 3-point percentage. They don't miss. I mean,
They
they
don't.
don't miss. They shoot
Believe
50%
me,
from.
I
They
know.
shoot 50% from the floor as a team. That is unbelievable.
That's
That's
outstanding.
that's ridiculous. That might be historic. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it is. But with KD, Kyrie, and Harden healthy, this team I just don't think is beatable in a 7-game series. And it'll be really interesting to see if anyone can stop them. I think if anyone, Trevor, can stop them, it's a team like the Lakers, a team with a solid amount of big men, a team with, obviously the greatest player in NBA history, a team with, championship experience. But outside of the Lakers, I mean, right now, Trevor, I don't see anyone who can beat this team. I don't know if you have any thoughts on what the Nets have been doing right now, but
Mhm.
I mean, they've been
I
absolutely
totally,
horrible.
I totally agree with everything with everything you just said. I think the Nets are going to win the East easily. I don't even think it's going to be close.
Mm.
I get Philadelphia's playing better, Milwaukee, Giannis, blah blah blah. I don't really care. Maybe Miami causes some problems out of nowhere. Brooklyn's winning the East. I'm just going to say that now. I'll pat myself on the back a little bit. I said at the beginning of the year, I was trying to warn people. Brooklyn is going, and this was before they got James Harden. Kevin Durant was going to remind people why he is the second best player in the world. And he was. He hasn't played the last few games, but he was averaging 31 a game. I mean, that's impressive.
Yeah.
And I think the problem with Brooklyn, and this is why Brooklyn's going to be unbeatable, is when you have three guys who can create their own shot anywhere on the floor, they're just unguardable. You can double someone, but then they're going to get a wide open three. And Joe Harris is a good 3-point shooter. Landry Shamet can be a good 3-point shooter. And these are probably the worst players that are going to be, playing in the game for Brooklyn.
Mm.
Excuse me. So for me, there's just no way to guard this team. I mean, you can double Durant, you can double Harden.
Yeah.
You can't, because if you double both of them, then you're playing 3-on-1.
Yep.
There's just no way to guard them. I mean, you can't. You
Mhm.
just have to hope for an off night. That's literally the best defense you can play against Brooklyn. You just have to hope for an off night. But, odds are Kyrie, Harden, or Durant, one of them is going to be hot every game. One of them is going to have it going every game.
Yep.
And it'll be more than likely that at least two or three, all three of them have it going.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just say one or two quick things. I mean, you can guard those three guys. Let's say you do. They have Joe Harris, Trevor, a guy who, they paid
He's
a
like
lot
the
of money.
best 3-point shooter in the NBA.
He's shooting over 50% from the 3-point line.
Right.
I mean, wow. And he's taking 7 attempts a game. That's not sustainable, in my opinion. But even if he finishes 46% from three, that's still unbelievable. So to have that shooting, outside of your big three, that's sensational. And your big three, I might add, are all shooting 40% or above from the 3-point line. I mean, this team they shoot lights out. It's simple as that. And until we see someone stop them on a semi-consistent basis, until we see some sort of weakness, I really don't know who can beat this team. All I'm going to say is, as annoying as it is to watch super teams, I feel like it's kind of exciting to watch this team play.
It's very fun
And
to watch them
I think it'll be really
play.
exciting in the playoffs. I think they'll be fun to watch as well because they don't play defense, so the games will be entertaining enough, right? These teams should be able to keep up with them in the playoffs. So it will be fun to watch come playoff time, these playoff matchups. And I'm really excited if there's a Lakers Nets finals. That would be a thriller of a series. So I'm really excited to see that. This team's fun to watch. I'm excited to see what they do the rest of the season, but I don't see how they can be beat right now.
Yeah, one final point on Brooklyn.
Sure.
I think the only way they don't win the East, and I don't know if it was them or the Lakers. I don't know who I would pick. I'm very back and forth
It's
on
close.
that. It's very close, especially, if you look at the Lakers fully healthy, they have a very, very deep roster.
Mm-hmm.
But the only way the Nets don't win the East is if they have a complete locker room implosion, which could happen. They have a lot of personality in there between Harden, Kyrie, and KD.
Yeah.
Or two of their three superstars get hurt. I think even if one of them goes down, I think they have good enough production from guys like Jeff Green, Joe Harris, Landry Shamet, and Luau Cabarro, where I still think they could win the East because I don't love what I'm seeing from the East right now anyways. And I still think they could honestly win the East if one of their big three goes down. So I think if they have a complete locker room implosion or if two of their three get hurt, that's the only way the Brooklyn Nets don't win the East. But I'm very excited to see them play with Kevin Durant and all three of them play together regularly because you're right. Super teams make it a little bit frustrating because it's almost unfair, but they're very entertaining. And just the amount of skill on that team is just off the charts. So
Yeah.
we'll see how it plays out. But I agree with you, Ryan. I think Brooklyn is scary. They might win it all.
Yeah, 100%. And, it's interesting to watch. And just one more thing before we close. I find it interesting that James Harden has basically become the point guard. Kyrie's basically the shooting guard.
Right.
He's taking 5 more shots than Harden. Harden's averaging, I think, I believe, let's see. I think it's 11 assists a game, Trevor. Yeah, 11 assists a game to Kyrie's 5 or 6. So it's kind of interesting seeing like how the roles have changed. Harden's now the third leading scorer on this team. Kyrie just takes the shots primarily. It's just fun to see this team evolve and see who takes what roles. But we'll see what happens. We'll see if they can keep this up. I think they will.
Mm-hmm.
But Trevor, I think with that, if you don't mind, I think that's going to be just about it for this
Perfect.
podcast. Yeah, so I think that just about wraps it up. But with that, we will be back next week with another podcast detailing any new NFL trades, maybe previewing NFL free agency, as well as talking more
Deshaun
about
Watson. We
Yep.
got other guys to talk about in free agency for sure.
Yeah, and
Go ahead, Ryan. Didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
no, it's okay. And we'll see what happens with the NBA. Any new trades, the trade deadline coming up close, any all-star snubs, things like that. So we look forward to seeing you next week. And Trevor, do you have any final thoughts?
I got nothing today. I did
Any
not
shout-outs?
I did not come prepared with a little fun sports fact. I apologize, but I will have one next podcast.
All right, sounds good. Well, we will look forward to that for episode number 40, and we'll see you guys next week.